Maria Rodriguez wiped down another table as the fancy guests laughed and chatted around her. The Meridian Club was the kind of place where people wore watches that cost more than most people's cars. She had been working here for 3 years now, and she knew exactly how to stay invisible. Keep your head down, serve the food, collect the tips, and go home. Tonight was different, though. The annual charity gala was the biggest event of the year. Rich people from all over the city came to eat expensive food and bid on fancy things, to help sick kids at the local hospital. Maria had volunteered to work extra hours because she needed every dollar she could get. Her little brother Diego was starting college next month, and the family was still short on tuition money. She balanced a tray of champagne glasses and walked through the crowd. These people looked like they stepped out of magazines. The women wore dresses that probably cost more than Maria made in 6 months. The men had perfectly styled hair and shoes so shiny you could see your reflection in them. They talked about their vacation homes and business deals while Maria refilled their water glasses and cleared their plates. But there was something else in the room that kept catching her eye. In the corner, sitting like a sleeping giant, was the most beautiful piano she had ever seen. It was a Steinway Grand, its black surface so polished it looked like a mirror. The chandelier above reflected off its surface, making it sparkle like a jewel. Every time Maria walked past it, her fingers tingled with memory. She remembered being 7 years old, sitting on a wooden crate because she was too small for the piano bench. Her grandmother, Sophia, would guide her tiny fingers across the worn keys of their old upright piano. The apartment was cramped and noisy, with neighbors arguing through thin walls and traffic honking outside. But when Maria played, all of that disappeared. It was just her, the music, and her grandmother's proud smile. "Music is in your blood, mija," her grandmother would say in Spanish. "One day the whole world will hear what I hear when you play." That was 21 years ago. Now Maria's grandmother was gone, and that old piano had been sold when they couldn't afford the rent anymore. Maria's dreams of being a pianist seemed as far away as the moon. Reality had a way of crushing dreams, especially when you had bills to pay and a family counting on you. She picked up empty plates from table 12 where a group of businessmen were arguing about some deal worth millions of dollars. One of them barely looked up as she reached for his glass. To them, she was just part of the furniture. Useful, but not really there. Not really a person with dreams and talents and a story of her own. Maria had learned to accept this invisibility. It paid the bills. It helped her family survive. But sometimes, late at night when she was counting tips at her kitchen table, she would remember the feel of piano keys under her fingers. She would remember the way music used to flow through her like water, natural and effortless and beautiful. The irony wasn't lost on her that she spent her days surrounded by people who could afford to make any dream come true, while her own dreams sat locked away in her heart like that silent piano in the corner. These guests would spend thousands of dollars tonight on auction items they probably didn't even want, just to show they could. Meanwhile, Maria was calculating whether she could afford to buy Diego new textbooks or if he would have to get used ones. As she walked back to the kitchen with another load of dishes, Maria caught a glimpse of herself in one of the many mirrors that lined the walls. Her uniform was crisp and professional, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be. Invisible help. But for just a moment, she imagined herself in one of those beautiful gowns, walking up to that piano, not to clean around it but to play it. The fantasy lasted only a second before reality crashed back in. She had dishes to wash, tables to clear, and tips to earn. Dreams were a luxury she couldn't afford. But as she pushed through the swinging doors into the bright kitchen, she couldn't shake the image of that piano. It seemed to be calling to her, waiting for something. The head waiter, Carlos, was frantically organizing the staff for the dinner service. 250 guests needed to be served their 5-course meal perfectly and on time. Maria tied her apron tighter and grabbed another tray. There was work to do, but every time she went back into the dining room, her eyes found that piano. And somewhere deep in her chest, in a place she had locked away years ago, something began to stir. Music had a way of refusing to stay buried forever, no matter how hard you tried to forget it. Tonight, Maria had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. She was just trying to get through another shift, earn another day's pay, and help her family survive. But sometimes the universe has different plans. Sometimes the very thing you've given up on is the thing that saves you. The piano waited in the corner, silent but patient, as if it knew something Maria didn't know yet. As if it knew that before this night was over it would finally get to sing again. The evening was running like clockwork until it wasn't. Maria was refilling water glasses at table 15 when she noticed the club manager, Robert Harrison, pacing near the kitchen entrance. His usually calm face looked stressed, and he was talking rapidly into his phone. This was unusual because Robert prided himself on running events so smoothly that problems never showed. "What do you mean he can't come?" Robert's voice was getting louder. "The guests are already seated. Dinner starts in 30 minutes. Maria pretended to arrange flowers on a nearby table, but she was listening. Something was wrong with tonight's entertainment. The program clearly stated that Vincent Keller, the famous pianist from the City Symphony, would perform during dinner. People had paid $500 per plate partly because of this promised performance. Robert ended the call and immediately dialed another number. His face was getting red, and sweat was starting to show on his forehead. "Hello. This is Robert Harrison from the Meridian Club. We have an emergency. Our pianist for tonight's gala has food poisoning and can't perform. Do you have anyone available? Anyone at all?" Maria's heart started beating faster. Food poisoning. The pianist couldn't come. She moved to another table, still listening, still pretending to work while her mind raced. $6,000 for 2 hours? That's impossible on such short notice, Robert was saying into his phone. What about the Berkeley School? Don't they have students who could... I see. Everyone's already committed for the evening. Maria watched as Robert made call after call. Each conversation ended the same way. No one was available. The few musicians who could perform on such short notice wanted fees that were impossible to arrange in 30 minutes. The club's reputation was built on delivering exactly what they promised, and now they were about to disappoint 250 of the city's most influential people. The other staff members started noticing the manager's distress. Word spread quickly through the kitchen that there would be no musical performance tonight. The head chef, who had specifically timed his courses to complement the musical program, was having to redesign the entire evening's flow. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert finally announced to the guests, his voice carrying across the elegant dining room, "I regret to inform you that due to sudden illness, our featured pianist, Vincent Keller, will not be able to perform this evening. We sincerely apologize for this disappointment and want to assure you that this does not affect our commitment to raising funds for the Children's Hospital." A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked annoyed. Others seemed more understanding. But the energy in the room definitely shifted. These people had come expecting a complete experience, and now a major piece was missing. Maria felt something stirring in her chest. It was the same feeling she used to get as a child when she heard music playing and knew exactly which keys to press to join in. Her fingers started tingling, and she found herself looking at that beautiful piano again. It sat there unused, waiting, while all these people sat disappointed. She knew she could play. Not just simple songs, but real music. Complex pieces that would make people forget their disappointment. Her grandmother had made sure of that, insisting Maria learn the classics, the pieces that stirred souls and changed moods. Chopin, Bach, Mozart, Rachmaninoff. Their music lived in her fingers like muscle memory that never faded. But what was she thinking? She was the help. These people didn't even see her as a real person, let alone as someone who could entertain them. She was Maria the waitress, not Maria the pianist. That dream had died years ago when reality took over. Still, she couldn't stop looking at the piano, and she couldn't stop thinking about her grandmother's words. Music is in your blood, mija. One day the whole world will hear what I hear when you play. Maybe today wasn't that day, maybe it would never be that day. But as Maria watched Robert make increasingly desperate phone calls, and as she saw the disappointed faces of the guests, Something inside her began to whisper that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly the day her grandmother had been talking about. The minutes ticked by. Robert's phone calls were getting more frantic. The guests were starting to talk among themselves, and the mood in the room was shifting from elegant anticipation to mild irritation. Some people were even starting to leave early, which would be a disaster for the fundraising goals. Maria set down her water pitcher and walked slowly toward the manager. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Her hands were shaking and her mouth felt dry, but her feet kept moving forward, as if they had a mind of their own. This was crazy. This was impossible. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not in real life. Waitresses didn't suddenly become concert performers. Dreams didn't come true just because you wanted them to. But as she got closer to Robert, who was now frantically scrolling through his phone contacts looking for anyone who might be able to help, Maria realized that sometimes life gives you a moment. A single moment where everything you've ever wanted is right there in front of you, waiting for you to be brave enough to reach for it. The question was, would she be brave enough? Could she really walk up to this man who barely knew her name and offer to save the evening? Could she really believe that she, Maria Rodriguez, the waitress, had something valuable to offer to this room full of important people? Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Music is in your blood, mija. Maybe it was time to find out if that was still true. Maria's legs felt like jelly as she walked toward Robert. Every step seemed to take forever, and with each one, her inner voice got louder, telling her to turn around and go back to work. Who did she think she was? This was ridiculous. She was about to make the biggest fool of herself in front of the most important people in the city. But something stronger than fear kept pushing her forward. Maybe it was her grandmother's spirit, or maybe it was 21 years of buried dreams finally demanding their moment. Whatever it was, it got her close enough to Robert that she could smell his expensive cologne and see the stress sweat on his forehead. "Excuse me, Mr. Harrison," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert looked up from his phone, clearly annoyed at being interrupted during his crisis. "Not now, Maria. Can't you see I'm dealing with an emergency?" "I know, sir. That's why I wanted to talk to you." Maria's voice was shaking, but she forced herself to continue. "I can play piano." Robert stared at her for a moment like she had spoken in a foreign language. Then he shook his head and went back to his phone. "That's nice, Maria, but I need a professional performer, not someone who can play Happy Birthday." "No, sir, you don't understand," Maria said, her voice getting a little stronger. "I really can play classical music, the pieces your guests would expect to hear." This time Robert looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. "Maria, I appreciate that you want to help, but this isn't amateur hour. These people paid $500 a plate. They expect professional-level entertainment." "I understand that, sir. But you said yourself that no one else is available. What if I could give them exactly what they paid for?" Robert was about to dismiss her again when his phone rang. It was another musician he had contacted, and Maria could hear the person on the other end explaining that they were already performing at another event across town. When Robert hung up, his shoulders sagged with defeat. "Look, Maria," he said, his voice gentler now but still skeptical. "I'm sure you're a lovely piano player. Maybe you took lessons as a kid. But these guests are expecting symphony-level performance. This could ruin the club's reputation if it goes wrong." "And what happens to the club's reputation if there's no music at all?" Maria asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "At least if I try, you're giving them something. Right now, you're giving them nothing." Robert looked around the room at the increasingly restless guests. Some were checking their phones, others were having louder conversations, and a few had already gotten up to leave. The elegant atmosphere was definitely beginning to crack. "You really think you can do this?" he asked, studying Maria's face for any sign of doubt. Maria thought about her grandmother's old piano, about all those hours practicing scales until her fingers ached. She remembered playing Chopin's nocturnes by candlelight when the electricity was cut off, and how her grandmother would cry every time Maria played Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto. She thought about all the dreams she had buried, all the music that had been sleeping inside her for years. Yes, sir. I know I can do this. Robert looked at his watch. The dinner was supposed to start in 15 minutes, and the musical portion in 20. He had no other options, and the evening was already heading toward disaster. If you embarrass this club, Maria, it will cost you your job. Do you understand that? I understand. And if you're not as good as you think you are, there won't be any coming back from this, not for you, and maybe not for me either. I understand that too. Robert stared at her for what felt like an hour but was probably only 10 seconds. Finally, he nodded. Go, get to that piano. You have 20 minutes to either save this evening or destroy both our careers. Maria felt like she was floating as she walked across the dining room toward the piano. The conversations around her seemed muffled, like she was underwater. She was aware of people noticing her unusual path. Waitresses didn't usually walk toward the entertainment area, but she kept moving forward. When she reached the piano, she stood there for a moment, just looking at it. Up close, it was even more beautiful than she had thought. The keys were perfect, not a single chip or scratch. The wood was polished to such a shine that she could see her reflection clearly. This was the kind of instrument she had dreamed of, playing her entire life. She looked out at the guests, and suddenly the reality of what she was about to do hit her like a truck. There were at least 200 people out there. Rich people, important people, people who could destroy her life with a single bad review or cruel comment. What if she forgot the pieces? What if her hands shook too much to play properly? What if 21 years away from serious music had dulled her skills more than she realized? But then she remembered something her grandmother used to say when Maria got nervous before playing. The music doesn't care if you're scared, mija. The music just wants to be free. Let it flow through you and everything else will take care of itself. Maria sat down on the piano bench and adjusted its height. The familiar weight of the keys under her fingers felt like coming home after a long journey. She placed her hands in position and took a deep breath. The room was still buzzing with conversation, but she could feel some people starting to notice that someone was sitting at the piano. A few guests near the front were turning in their chairs to see what was happening. Maria chose her opening piece carefully, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. It was a piece her grandmother had taught her when she was 12, and it was beautiful enough to capture attention immediately, but familiar enough that her muscle memory could carry her through any nerves. She placed her fingers on the keys, said a silent prayer to her grandmother's spirit, and began to play. Trao. First notes floated out into the room like a gentle wave, soft and sweet and perfectly controlled. Maria felt the familiar magic as her fingers found their way across the keys, as if they had never stopped playing, as if 21 years had been just a moment's pause in an ongoing conversation with the music. The change in the room was immediate and dramatic. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Heads turned toward the piano as the haunting melody filled every corner of the elegant space. Maria was no longer Maria the waitress. She was music itself, flowing and breathing and alive. The transformation was magical. As Maria's fingers danced across the keys, something incredible happened in that room. The chattering stopped completely. The clinking of silverware against china went silent. Even the servers in the back stopped, moving, drawn by the pure beauty of the sound floating through the air. Maria felt the music flowing through her like electricity, like water, like breath itself. Her nervousness melted away as muscle memory took over. Her fingers knew exactly where to go, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly when to let a note linger and when to let it fade. It was as if 21 years had collapsed into nothing, and she was 12 years old again, playing for her grandmother in their tiny apartment. But this wasn't their old upright piano with its stuck keys and out-of-tune strings. This Steinway responded to her touch like a living thing. Every note was crystal clear, every chord rich and full. The piano seemed to have been waiting for her, and now it was singing with joy at finally being played by someone who truly understood its voice. The Chopin Nocturne filled the room with its gentle, haunting melody. But Maria wasn't just playing the notes on the page. She was telling a story with her music, painting pictures with sound. The melody spoke of longing and love, of dreams deferred but not forgotten. It spoke of beauty that exists even in the darkest moments of hope that refuses to die. The guests were completely mesmerized. These were people who attended the symphony regularly, who knew good music when they heard it. They could tell immediately that this wasn't just someone who had taken a few piano lessons. This was a real musician, someone with genuine talent and deep understanding of the music. At table 7, Eleanor Whitman, the city's most prominent philanthropist, had tears streaming down her cheeks. She had donated millions to arts programs over the years, but she rarely felt moved by performances anymore. Too many mediocre musicians, too many people playing technically correct but emotionally empty music. But this was different. This was raw, honest, beautiful music that came from somewhere deep and real. Near the back of the room, David Chen, a music producer who had discovered some of the world's most famous artists, had stopped eating entirely. He was leaning forward in his chair, his full attention focused on the woman at the piano. In his 30 years in the music business, he had learned to recognize exceptional talent within the first few notes. What he was hearing now was beyond exceptional. It was extraordinary. As the nocturne came to its gentle conclusion, Maria didn't pause. Instead, she flowed seamlessly into Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most challenging and beautiful pieces in the classical repertoire. This was the piece that had always been her favorite, the one her grandmother said was written for Maria's soul. The room gasped as the opening chords filled the air. This wasn't easy music. This was music that required not just technical skill, but deep emotional maturity and years of serious training. Yet Maria played it as if it was as natural as breathing. Her hands moved across the keys with impossible grace, hitting every note perfectly while pouring her heart into every phrase. She played the orchestral parts from memory, her left hand creating rich, complex harmonies, while her right hand sang the main melody with such emotion that people in the audience felt their hearts breaking and healing at the same time. This was music that spoke to something beyond the intellect, something that touched the very core of what it means to be human. Dr. Patricia Williams, a famous neurosurgeon sitting at table 12, found herself thinking about her mother, who had died the year before. The music was bringing back memories she thought she had safely tucked away. She wasn't the only one. All around the room, the music was reaching into people's hearts and pulling out feelings they had forgotten they had. Robert Harrison stood near the kitchen entrance, watching in complete amazement. He had been managing events at the Meridian Club for 15 years, and he had never seen anything like this. The room was completely transformed. These usually restless, chattering guests were sitting in absolute silence, completely absorbed in the music. Some were crying openly. Others sat with their eyes closed, lost in the beauty of what they were hearing. But it wasn't just the technical perfection of Maria's playing that was so incredible. It was the emotion, the passion, the way she seemed to become one with the music. She wasn't performing for these people. She was sharing something sacred with them. She was opening her heart and letting them see inside. As the Rachmaninoff built to its powerful climax, Maria's entire body was involved in the performance. Her shoulders swayed with the rhythm, her face showed every emotion the music contained. She was completely lost in the moment, completely free, completely alive in a way she hadn't been for 21 years. The music filled every corner of the room, every corner of every heart. It bounced off the crystal chandeliers and wrapped around the marble columns. It seeped into the souls of people who thought they were too sophisticated to be moved by anything. It reminded them why music had been called the universal language, why it had the power to unite people across every barrier that usually divided them. At that moment, it didn't matter that Maria was the waitress and they were the guests. It didn't matter that she was wearing a simple black uniform while they were dressed in designer clothes. It didn't matter that they lived in different worlds, had different bank accounts, different backgrounds, different life experiences. All that mattered was the music. And the music was saying that talent doesn't care about your address or your bank account. Beauty doesn't ask permission before it appears. And sometimes, The most extraordinary gifts come wrapped in the most ordinary packages. As Maria played the final soaring notes of the concerto, building to a climax that made the very air in the room seem to shimmer, every person in that audience knew they were witnessing something special, something they would remember for the rest of their lives, something that would change how they thought about talent, about dreams, about the hidden potential that exists in every human being. The last note rang out into the silence, hanging in the air like a prayer, like a promise, like the sound of a life being transformed forever. For a moment after the music ended, the silence was so complete that Maria wondered if time itself had stopped. She sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, hardly daring to breathe. Had she really just done that? Had she really just performed for 250 of the city's most important people? Then the room exploded. The applause started slowly, just one person clapping, then another. Then suddenly everyone was on their feet. The sound was thunderous, filling the elegant space with appreciation so genuine and so powerful that the crystal glasses on the tables actually began to ring in harmony. People weren't just clapping politely the way they usually did at fancy events. They were celebrating, shouting "Bravo" and "Magnificent." Some guests were crying openly, not caring that their makeup was running or that their expensive clothes were getting wrinkled as they stood and cheered. Maria stood up from the piano bench on shaking legs, hardly believing what was happening. The applause went on, washing over her like a warm wave. She looked out at all those faces, faces that had ignored her just hours ago when she was serving their drinks, and saw genuine admiration, genuine emotion, genuine respect. Eleanor. Whitman was the first to reach her, practically running across the room with tears streaming down her face. "My dear," she said, grasping Maria's hands in hers, "that was the most beautiful thing I've heard in 40 years of attending concerts. Who are you? Where did you train?" Before Maria could answer, David Chen appeared at her side. "Miss, I'm David Chen from Harmony Records. I've been in the music business for 30 years, and what you just did, I've never heard anything like. Here's my card. Please call me tomorrow. We need to talk." More people were gathering around the piano now, all wanting to meet the mysterious woman who had just given them the performance of their lives. Dr. Williams introduced herself and asked if Maria gave private lessons for her daughter. A famous restaurant owner wanted to hire her to play at his establishment. 3 different music teachers were offering to give her advanced lessons for free. But it was Robert Harrison's face that Maria found herself looking for in the crowd. When she spotted him near the edge of the group, she saw something in his expression that she had never seen before. Respect. Not the polite respect he showed to difficult guests, but real respect for someone who had just accomplished something extraordinary. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert announced, his voice carrying over the excited chatter, "I think we can all agree that tonight's performance was absolutely remarkable. And I think we should also recognize that this young woman, Maria Rodriguez, has been serving you with grace and professionalism for 3 years. She is not just a talented musician, she is a valued member of our Meridian Club family." The applause started up again, even louder this time. Maria felt like she was dreaming. 3 hours ago, these same people had barely acknowledged her existence. Now they were treating her like a celebrity. Eleanor Whitman raised her hand for attention. "If I may," she said in her clear, authoritative voice, "I would like to make an announcement. I have been supporting arts education for 25 years, and I have never been more moved by a performance. Maria, I would like to offer you a full scholarship to any music conservatory in the world. Juilliard, Curtis, wherever you want to. Study. You have a gift that needs to be shared with the world." The room erupted in cheers again. Maria felt dizzy. A full scholarship? To Juilliard? These were the kinds of opportunities she had dreamed about as a child but had given up on years ago when real life took over. "And," David Chen added, "I would like to arrange for Maria to make a recording. We'll handle all the costs, all the production. The world needs to hear this talent." What happened next was unlike anything anyone at the Meridian Club had ever seen. The charity auction, which usually focused on luxury items like vacation packages and artwork, suddenly took on a completely different purpose. Guests started bidding on the chance to sponsor Maria's musical career. I'll contribute $10,000 toward her first recording," shouted a man from table 8. "$20,000 for a scholarship fund," called out a woman near the back. "$50,000 for whatever she needs to get started," Eleanor Whitman announced, causing another wave of applause. Within 30 minutes, they had raised over $200,000 beyond the original charity goal, all in support of Maria's musical future. The evening that had started as a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital had become something much bigger, a celebration of hidden talent and the power of dreams. Maria's phone started buzzing with text messages. Someone had recorded part of her performance and posted it online. Within hours, the video had thousands of views, then tens of thousands. People were sharing it across social media platforms, calling it the most beautiful thing they'd ever heard, and proof that talent can be found anywhere. By the next morning, Maria's story was trending on every major platform. News stations wanted to interview her. Music blogs were writing articles about the waitress who stunned the elite. Record companies were calling Robert Harrison's office trying to get in touch with her. 3 days later, Maria quit her job at the Meridian Club, not because she had to, but because she had other opportunities now. Real opportunities to pursue the dream she had buried 21 years ago. 6 months later, she stood on the stage at Carnegie Hall, wearing a beautiful gown that Eleanor Whitman had insisted on buying for her. As she sat down at another Steinway Grand and prepared to play for an audience of 3,000 people, Maria thought about her grandmother. "Music is in your blood, mija," she whispered to herself. "And now the whole world gets to hear it." The first notes of Chopin filled the legendary hall, and Maria smiled. She was finally home. But the story didn't end there. Maria never forgot where she came from or how it felt to be invisible. She used her new platform to advocate for arts education in schools that couldn't afford music programs. She gave free concerts at community centers and taught piano lessons to kids whose families couldn't afford private instruction. Most importantly, she proved something that the guests at the Meridian Club would never forget. Extraordinary talent doesn't always come with impressive credentials or fancy backgrounds. Sometimes it's right there in front of you, waiting tables, cleaning offices, or doing any of the thousands of jobs that keep the world running. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage, one leap of faith, one chance to show the world what you're really made of. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the world is ready to listen. Maria's story became a reminder that dreams don't have expiration dates, that it's never too late to pursue what makes your heart sing, and that the most beautiful music often comes from the most unexpected places. The waitress had stepped up to the piano and she had changed everything, not just for herself, but for everyone who heard her play that magical night at the Meridian Club.